Welcome to Vision 360, where we examine cybersecurity from every angle, business leadership, governance, strategy, risk, and decisions that shape today's organizations. I am your host, Matthew Webster, and I help organizations bridge business and cybersecurity. My guest today is Martin Gomberg, an executive advisor, author, and technology leader with decades of experience spanning cybersecurity, privacy, governance, and business transformation. Martin has spent his career helping organizations navigate the intersections of business, technology, and emerging risk. Martin, welcome to the show. If you could do a better job introducing yourself than I did, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you.
Certainly. Hi, all, and thank you, Matthew. Let me give you a little bit quick background. I started out as a forensic anthropologist. It went from that to some 20 years, I guess, with one company as CIO, then global CISO, a bunch of years in privacy. So I've touched a lot of this stuff from science on through business, on through on through a lot of the regulatory changes that are in place now. I currently joined up with a friend of mine who I met some 30 years ago when we formed the CIO Executive Council. It was 14 of us then. I think there's some 3,000 of them now. We're no longer engaged with them, but it was a good effort. The idea was to bring together a lot of CIO thought and get them together. We've now developed a not-for-profit organization that we call the Digital Risk Alliance, of which I'm a CIO and Executive Fellow. The purpose of the Digital Risk Alliance is to kind of recognize that the things we need to be focusing on as businesses gotten a lot more complex and likely will grow a lot more complex yet. So we're an association that looks at the kind of the interface of business, technology, law, security, privacy, society, ethics, culture. A lot of stuff, bringing together smart people in all of those dimensions to share thoughts, work on complex problems, and help businesses through those things. We work with AI, we work with quantum, we work with genomics, we work with sustainability questions. We're talking about things like resource management, smart cities, a lot of stuff. The world is changing. We have to kind of change with it. So this is kind of where we're focused as an organization and what we do. That's kind of our story.
I love it. That's a fantastic background for this. And when I met you, I could tell you had a lot of experience with that. And so I'm excited about today's conversation, which we'll go ahead and jump into today. Because really what we're looking at is a lot of organizations don't succeed because they adopt the latest technology. They succeed because leaders make disciplined decisions when and how to invest, what to prioritize, how to govern that change process, et cetera. So today's conversation explores how executive judgment, not just the technology itself, determines whether transformation creates resilience or chaos and what it's like in between the two. So let's go ahead and dive into some of the questions here because I'm fascinated to hear what you have to say. So we all know that technology is changing very quickly. You just stated that yourself. So what has fundamentally changed about the kind of judgment executives are expected to exercise compared to even like 5 years ago, before AI, for example?
Good question. Thank you for that. I think in large part, just to kind of put a context behind the question, yes, CEOs, boards, they're working kind of in a new terrain. CEOs have always dealt with questions like risk and opportunity, competition, capital, credit, regulatory changes, technology. That was kind of our environment in which we've had to work as senior executives in companies. Um, it's a little bit changed now. It's a little bit changed now because we've now had to deal with things like AI on the technology side, but more importantly, social media, a changing consumer, globalization, the stuff that we do and how we work, new markets, regulatory changes across the board, societal changes, and most importantly, culture. We're dealing with a changing culture that has new definitions of trust. It has new expectations. A lot of things reshaping the context in which the CEO and board has to work. In large part, I see that is the major difference between a couple of years back. We said maybe 7, 7 years ago, we had GDPR just emerging.
Yep.
We had CCPA just 2 years following that. 2 privacy laws, roughly. We now have over 200. And they're a mix of, and they're all over the globe. They're a mix of privacy, health, genetics, children's protection, all of these types of laws coming together, and now add into them the digital landscape laws that are dealing with questions like AI, what will quantum do, ton of regulation to deal with. Our risks are all different. We 5 years ago, ransomware was a major problem for us. It still is. The shift in how we defended ourselves no longer made sense to do perimeter-based defenses. We've moved into the cloud. We've dealt with the cloud-based issues. We had zero trust come along. And now we've got AI. And AI presents a whole new type of risk that none of these other things really anticipate. You can't firewall protect yourself from a prompt attack. You can't deal with a lot of the things that AI introduces in terms of risk, in that many of them look like normal business activity. It's not like you see a threatening cyber attack coming across the wire, coming in to steal your data. It's simply the sum of a bunch of bad decisions. And in aggregate, they produce a problem. Maliciously, yeah, it could be malicious, but it doesn't have to be malicious. It could simply be poor governance. We're asking the wrong questions. We're setting up prompts in the wrong way. A lot of this stuff is simply internal problems.
So let's dive into that a little bit, because you have a great point that I think deserves a little bit more attention, is the bad decisions. Because there's 1,000 ways I think any audience member who's listening to this could start to interpret that. For example, you could say, you know what, maybe we're jumping on the bandwagon a little bit too early. Maybe we don't understand the attack vectors. And I think anybody who's been in the CISO role, we all understand that. We understood early on that we don't understand. We take a conservative approach, but you're talking about bad decisions. And a lot of this, when you get back to executives, that's where the challenge is. So many people are jumping on the AI bandwagon. It's the fear of missing out. And so sometimes what I find when I'm working with organizations, the business teams are saying one thing, go, go, go with AI. And then you get the IT departments and the security departments like, let's try to do this reasonably and figure out what is reasonable. So talk to me a little bit about that dichotomy. Talk to me about those bad decisions that you're seeing. And what is it that you mean by those bad decisions?
Yeah, everything you've just said is exactly right. One of the things I see when when a new CISO comes into a company, anytime I get on a conference, they always ask this question. New CISO comes into a company, what's the first thing he should do? And the first thing he should do, it's always the response is inventory the AI. Okay. One of the parts of the problem with that response is it goes right to the technology. AI is not necessarily a technical problem. It's a business problem. We don't understand, the structure of a business, where we do what we do, what data we collect, how do we protect it, what workflows we conduct, what are our processes, sub-processes, tasks, subtasks, all of the information that you need to ask AI to do a sensible question and construct the proper guardrails, to keep it contained and keep it focused on the things that you need. Governance, executive governance, should be the process of making sure that those people who ask those questions ask it in the proper way with the proper guidance and context around the business. The problem is we do these inventories of AI and we come up with, okay, we've got 13 approved AI agents running in the business. Well, when you actually do the inventory, you find that you don't have 13, you have 112. How did they get there? What are we asking them to do? And what are the constraints around the actions that they're taking? AI is an issue to us, less from the perspective of the models. It's about the poor application. It's first about the decision of, for the things we're asking it to do we need AI at all? Are we simply, as executives, from the board level to the senior executive level on down through technology and other parts, silos within the business, can we clear those silos so that technology and HR and legal are working together, feeding the proper questions and giving the proper answers up through executive management so that they understand, is executive management educating themselves so that they can ask the proper questions and ensure that the right kinds of answers are coming their way. We give them KPIs, like we say, our customer service bot answered 2,000 questions this week for our consumers. Now you got an executive who says, oh, that's wonderful. That's 2,000 customers we've just served at super high speed with our chatbots. If they don't ask the question, well, should they have they responded correctly? And should they have responded at all? And unless you're bringing the right levels of questions to the executives, giving the executives the opportunity to educate themselves so that they drive down deeper questions about the controls in place, etc. What is it you're doing? Why is it that you're doing it? How are we doing this stuff? What are the metrics? What are the controls? What are, unless we have that kind of context around this stuff, things fail.
So it sounds like what you're saying is you're putting a lot of this on the onus of the executives themselves. Like this, like what I'm hearing in between the lines is sort of looking at the CEO or possibly the COO to ask the right questions and to engage people in the right way to get more straightforward feedback.
Yeah, an uninformed executive, an uninformed board are probably emerging to be as great a threat to a company as any third party threat ever was, or any technology threat ever was. If they're not asking the right questions, their business is in danger. They need to inform themselves, make sure that the right people are asking the right questions at the right times, in the right ways, to the right depth, and then do the right things. Do we need AI for everything? What do we need AI for? Uh, what kind of benefits are we seeing? Can we demonstrate that? You know, companies are putting a lot of money into building infrastructure, data centers, all this stuff. A lot of tons of money is being invested on AI. The question is, how does that relate to the return? What are we getting out of all of this stuff? And most of this studies and examinations of this show a tremendous amount of investment and very little return. And the question then becomes, how do you bring those things closer? Yeah, you've got to be able to bring down your costs and some of that stuff. For instance, in China with developing AI models that are open sourced, might bring down some cost. How do you bring up your success rate? Well, your success rate is largely going to be driven by, are we looking at the right things in the right ways, and do we understand our business in the first place? You know, I take this back to, for privacy studies, I'd go into a company and I'd ask them, you know, tell me about your data, tell me about the processes that you do. And many of even some of the biggest of companies don't have a good handle on the data that they capture, the way that they capture it, the processes that they run, the workflows they participate in, who those third-party partners are with which they integrate. They don't have all of that locked down. And to me, there's not a lot of distance between the stuff that the privacy people need to do, the continuity people need to do, the people working on AI. We're dealing with the processes that run a company, the workflows we participate in, who are our partners, what is it that we actually do for a living. If you can't answer those questions, none of those things succeed. If you can answer those questions, all of those things work better.
Yeah, I totally agree with your perspective here. And kind of implied in your statement, whether you're a CIO or a CISO, you definitely need to be better integrated with the business, but the business also has to want to integrate with everybody else. When you look at a lot of the studies, say the NACD, they put out a report saying the companies that are more successful are also more communicative up at the top and engaging in stronger conversations. That's been my personal experience. But what's interesting, and you kind of alluded to this, and I'm seeing study after study after study saying the same thing, that cost benefit analysis is not being done from the executive level in terms of the return on AI. So that's where I said a little bit about the FOMO. They're just running and running and running, thinking it's got to be everything. And well, it can be, but what are the risks that are associated with that? And it sounds like too, and this is something I don't know. Do you bring in that risk quantification? Because you're looking at risks related to an enterprise level, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is the better way to look at it. And it's a better way to integrate with the business, a better way to communicate, not only for CISOs, but for CIOs and for others. But do you bring in the risk side of the house? Like, for example, when you're looking at a lot of those chat bots, it's an example you had brought up yourself. Um, how do you look at that? Do you bring in legal and say, hey, what happens if they have access to the database? They go to the database and they decide to A, just delete it, which we've seen several examples of that out there. But or B, maybe they just say, well, we're going to permit this island to be sold for $5 when it's really worth multi-millions of dollars. And it does make those types of decisions on its own. And that's a big challenge. People don't understand. They might be outside use cases or outside examples, but they could, in theory, have large impacts on organizations, depending on the context. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your thinking there.
Yeah, this is an enterprise problem. Our problem is, in large part, that our enterprises are, for the most part, siloed. We have to break past those silos: legal, risk, security, even within security, the guys that do DevOps versus the guys who deal with network security versus et cetera. We've got to break down those silos because we all have a piece. And if we're dealing with, if HR is focusing on solely the people part of this question, if technology sees this as a technology issue, if security sees this as a security issue, we fail. We have to bring down the silos that separate us. To give you another example, I've asked at one company, I've asked the guy who's in charge of vulnerability management, I said, you guys have a security policy? He said, security policy? We've got the best security policy you'll ever see. It's better than any other security policy probably anybody's ever written anywhere. He asked the guy next to him, you got a security policy? I said, right, I don't know, I never saw one. So the question then becomes, do you have a security policy? It's like any governance document you ever wrote with no signature from executives, it's not a governance document. It doesn't exist. It's invisible.
Yeah.
So in large part, that's a problem that that's pervasive. This is an enterprise issue. We've got to deal with it as an enterprise issue, and we've got to break through any of these siloed containers. We're dealing with tomorrow's problems using yesterday's perspectives and yesterday's organization. We're dealing with we're dealing with tomorrow's risks using yesterday's approaches, yesterday's challenges.
Could you provide an example of that that would make it a little easier for an audience member to understand? Because I understand you, I agree with it. And there's some simplistic ways of looking at it, but I think you're looking at something a little bit deeper.
Let's take a very obvious one that sits at the top. Your SOC 2 is very strong. How is it going to help you with regard to these AI threats? They look at different things. Will the defenses that you've built for Godzilla help to protect you against the threat of Rodan? Two different monsters. That's what we've got here. AI is a very different monster. It works in very different ways. The security defenses, our microsegmentation, our questions of zero trust. Zero trust has some elements that will help now with some of these AI issues, but not all. These privilege is a good one. Always give AI least privilege. But the security controls, a router won't protect you against a bad prompt. It won't protect you against data leakage or leakage between different sessions, different events. It won't protect you against those things because it sees that as normal traffic. We're dealing with two different monsters. And we have to recognize that we're dealing with two different monsters and approach them in a different way. One of the issues that we looked at, for instance, we did a session in London in November. We remodeled a equity research business. And we said, okay, this equity research business went from the traditional way that kind of business was done to a entirely agentic system where global partners were all connected together, all utilizing their agentic agents to communicate with each other and share the flow of data between. Wonderful, beautiful, beautiful system. Till you sit back and think about it for a second and you say, okay, when you built your agentic systems, what were your priorities? What were you thinking about? Do you understand your issues in the same way as I understand mine? Do you have the same skill sets in your developers as I have in mine? When these agentic agents meet out there in the nethers somewhere where they're traveling and they make decisions together, what are the controls you put around it and how do you guardrail these? I can guardrail stuff when it's within a department. I can guardrail stuff when one department is talking to another within my company, maybe. When my chatbot is talking to a consumer, my risk increases if I don't know what it's doing. When my chatbot is talking to another company, my risk increases because I don't know what it's doing. Zero trust was great for things coming in to the company, but now we've got an agent running around out there. That's different. Okay. It's no longer a question of identity management. It's not so much a question of least privilege because I don't know what privileges the other guy has. So we've got agents running out there. How do we secure AI as we move to the next transformation of AI, which is it's no longer inside, it's now between businesses. Necessary for that to happen because that's where our supply chain lives. It's out there. We've got to move out there. Necessarily, our agents will move out there. But how do we answer these questions? Can it carry its own security? Can the data carry its own security? Can the data carry its own trust? These are key questions now.
Yeah. And one of
Bigger
the greatest risks that I'm seeing with AI is it's susceptible to things like poetry. And you can manipulate AI to go get more access to data, even if you put the guardrails in place. Well, I'm an auditor or I'm this, and you just make up these things. AI doesn't know the difference between that. So a lot of the traditional static, while it may have worked, defenses may have worked reasonably well, like role-based access controls, et cetera. AI, it's a whole different ball game. And that's not something a lot of people realize too. Like I was at a non-human identity summit, and before what you had is, approximately 80 different identities per person within an organization. But now with AI, especially part of the challenge is you have ephemeral identities that are there for a brief second, then go away. And a lot of AI, when it's, especially when you're looking at the agentic, they aren't connected into, say, the Windows identity system, or it's just going to grab whatever privileges it can possibly grab. And sometimes the number they were throwing around there was 443 identities for every person. That's more than a fourfold increase from what we had prior to AI. And definitely it's trying to manage something like that when you don't even have something that's connecting into systems gets to be a big challenge. And it's something a business person wouldn't necessarily know.
Yeah.
So when you're building the culture and you're looking at that strategy, and a lot of people, and there's been a lot of studies, and one of the things I do is I take a look at different personality types. But when you look at CEOs, typically one of the resources that was studying that said it was 18% of CEOs have narcissistic traits, and they aren't necessarily going back to go listen to the people inside. How do you bridge that gap, or how do you create that strategy, that culture where you're listening to the various people when you're looking at something as complex and as nuanced as AI?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And it also comes down to a question of where uh, where in are our organizations going? How are they defining how we manage this next generation of what we call the new mode technologies, AI, quantum, genomics, all of that? How we manage all of this stuff? Who does it? Does the CDO elevate, or does the CDO get absorbed into one of these other functions like CIO, CISO, or all three of them combined together to form something else? Uh, do we need specialists in each of those areas? Quantum CIO, quantum CISO. Do we need that? Do we, we have privacy specialists that talk directly to our CEO if we follow the GDPR. Will that remain the same, or does that become something different? If you look at LinkedIn, uh, perhaps, how long has it been that AI has been on the radar? Machine learning, the time that passed between neural networks and machine learning. I knew neural networks back in 1996 or thereabouts. The time that gap that passed between them was considerable. Then you had the time that passed between machine learning and the first ChatGPT stuff that popped out, generative and predictive kinds of AI, much shorter window. We saw that window between generative and agentic shrink to next to nothing. How long do you think this stuff is going to sit around the way it is? Or is it going to be something different? When we then start talking about whatever AI transforms to, it integrating with quantum and the two of them working together to solve whatever problems AI and quantum think they need to solve. Tying that together with the genomics and sustainability and all of these other areas we talked about before, that's a tremendous amount of technology, but it's also a tremendous amount of possibility. Possibility containing opportunity and risk. And we don't know which direction that vector is going. How do you organize to manage that? What's your governance look like? Does it look like your governance looks today? I somehow suspect it doesn't. And how do companies begin to prepare for that today? When we were talking about quantum 2 years ago, we were looking at something that's kind of out there and someday might appear. Now we're talking about governments that are readying themselves quantum. The expectation is it's here. And if you haven't prepared your for post-quantum cryptography and computing capabilities, etc., you're probably going to fall a little bit behind the curve on that. Companies should be inventorying the number of places where they've got cryptographic algorithms and all of this stuff running. What's protected by encryption, what's protected by anonymization, pseudonymization, all of these things. What do you got out there? Because some of that stuff may not be a fit for you in a lot sooner a time frame than you may be thinking. So these are the kinds of things that I think we need to start to think about governance differently. Yeah. Organizations will need to be rethought and reimagined based on the kinds of changes that are going to come our way.
I mean, if you look at a lot of traditional governance models, and you had brought up the board earlier, and if you look at some of the statistics regarding the board, most boards don't even have IT expertise, much less cybersecurity expertise. Yeah. Some of the requirements, we're going to say, hey, we need somebody with cybersecurity expertise, but didn't define exactly what that expertise means. So it could mean just about anything. And you could look to some legal cases. I know when you're dealing with Change Healthcare, Senator Wyden was really going against Change Healthcare and everything that was going on. You had somebody who was a CISO who never had any experience. You didn't have real expertise on the board with technology,
Yeah.
much less cybersecurity. So some people are going to be good at asking the questions. Like one thing I'm getting out of this interview is you're really good at asking those kind of questions to look about what those downstream impacts are. Not everybody on the board is going to have that kind of mind, and it's a huge problem. And how do we begin to handle that when the governance structures themselves are they don't even know where to begin to ask the right questions to make sure that things are governed properly. And sometimes the CEOs are hiring board members because they're going to fit what they're looking for in a particular board member and may not cover what the organization actually means. And so when you're looking at this, especially you look at technologies you brought up, it's accelerating very quickly. I don't know what it's going to look like. We have some challenges in AI where we're looking at the human in the loop, like, no, we can't do that. We need AI versus AI, and we all know the problems with that. It ends up dissolving or not always working. It helps, it's an improvement, but far from perfection. When you're looking at all of these types of challenges, how do you mulch all that together to be able to create a better organizations when every human being, myself included, we have blind spots. That's the nature of being human. We're experts at certain things and not at other things. And so from a governance standpoint, just getting the right people in the room to ask the right questions is a massive undertaking.
That's a perfect question. That's a perfect question. And the question contains a lot of the elements of the answers that we need.
Yes.
And because one of the clear things you bring up is the silos. Um, it also brings up the need for the transformation at the level of the board and at the level of the CEO. They need to look different. You know, boards traditionally have looked at things like strategy, uh, financials, organization structure, stuff like that, executive compensation, things like, at that level. They need to now come down, get much closer to the operations of a business that is no longer siloed, but working together so that you get all of the fingers, legal, HR, technology, um, operations, the different business structures, talking directly to the people who either are on the board or are communicating with the board, and shrink that distance between the two because the board needs to be informed. They can only make these decisions and steer corporate executives effectively if they understand what the questions are. And for the most part, as you point out, they don't. So it really comes down to being a question of how do you structure the boards, what kind of skills those boards need, what kind of flattening needs to take place in the organization between executive board and operating levels. There's a lot of that needs to be rethought because, as I pointed out before, one of the greatest challenges to any operating company is an ineffective board or ineffective CEO now, making decisions on some things that they're either being poorly informed about, or they simply don't understand or don't want to know about. If any of those things are true, you've got an issue in the company that needs to be addressed. And so it's board readiness, it's executive capacity, it's organization's adaptability, it's resilience in the organization, it's the core culture of the company. All of those things are the things that the board needs to get their hands around. They need to get their hands around and they need to reshape.
Yeah. And what I've seen in a lot of organizations, and this is not true across the board, there is
Mhm.
always this sort of natural tension between the board and the CEO. and then you get the narrative control. Here are the things. And then it's like I have talked with CISOs at various points where it's like they don't even get a chance to speak with the board. And
Hmm.
then it's like going through how the CIO or the CTO wants to look at things. And there's all these different challenges. I would think because of that, like, for example, there was like, I was talking to somebody yesterday, 4 hour board meeting, and cybersecurity had 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And this is very common. So one of the most important things for organizations is treated as a side discussion from a board perspective. And that's something that's to me very concerning. I respect looking at the financials. I respect looking at all these other things, and I want them there. I also think we need to understand the technology risk that's associated with organizations today. How do you create that transformation structure if boards aren't asking the right questions? They aren't down at the right level. And I've seen some that are. I've seen, for example, the happiest CISOs or chief compliance officers or whatever, they're reporting into the board.
Hmm.
They're
Hmm.
not reporting into a technical function. They're not reporting into a CFO or the CEO. They're reporting into the board of directors, and they've got the most freedom to speak up. And that's one of the big challenges that I see in organizations is just the fear of speaking up over and over and over again. And a lot of that has to do with human psychology. I could spend an hour talking about that. But how do we get around ourselves as human beings to create better boards, to be able to create some other things? Because that to me is where a lot of those challenges are.
Yeah. Yeah. Boards are made up of people,
Yeah.
and people have personalities, and some personalities work well with approaching others at different levels of the organization and interacting. Other personalities say, no, 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 we don't talk to you. Um, and that is a problem. We need to get these things closer. One of the problems, you say the board gave them 5 minutes for cybersecurity. Question becomes, what does it define as cybersecurity? And then, second question is, what do they define as their purpose? If their purpose is to direct, is to focus on the direction of the company, where are we going as a company? Then part of that discussion has to be, are we adopting AI? Why are we adopting AI? How do we plan to use AI? Is that part of the cybersecurity 5 minutes, or is that a business discussion? And a big part of the way in which we've got to change that 5 minutes of cybersecurity into something meaningful is we have to change it into a business aligned discussion, you know, because that's where they're focused. They're not focused on this. In the privacy world, uh, I once posted that someone had asked the question about how do we, how do we get the attention? What role should the CEO play? And my response is that there's greater uh, no greater strength than a CEO saying, you know, this is important to me personally, and this is important to our company. Let's get behind it. If we simply take that message and bring that up, you know, whether you're talking about privacy, whether you're talking about security, whether you're talking about whatever it is, get the message out there that from the top, this is important to us personally. And by the way, by law now it is. um, and that's not simply one law now. There's multiples of law that are requiring, for instance, the CISO to communicate directly with the board and stuff of that sort.
Yeah.
But if we get the top of the company to make that statement, this is important to us personally. This is important to our brand. Let's get behind it. A lot of barriers break down. The people who said, you know what, we're not interested in AI. this side of the business, despite the fact that it may be an important element of the business, the rest of the business. Or the guy that says, you know what, well, let our kids play, that they'll do whatever they want to do. You know, you got to get that message pushed down. This is important. Take it seriously. It's important to our brand. It's important to us personally. You see a lot of that garbage clear away. You need the executive attention. But you can only get it if the executives understand what questions they need to be asking. Why are we doing this? How are we doing this? How are we going to protect it? What's the benefits to us for proceeding? If there's not going to be any return, you know,
Yeah, why do
uh,
it?
there are other things we could focus on,
Yeah.
and you should be.
Well, I also think one of the things that's very tough is I like to look at total cost of ownership. So for example, let's say you determine that AI isn't worthwhile, but maybe you've got, 20% of the people like, you know what, I don't want to get AI. Well, I'm going to go ahead and you block it off, say at the firewall level or the secure web gateway level, depending on what you're on the technologies. And you have people like, I'm going to go ahead and email myself all this corporate data to my personal email. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my own AI, then send the responses of that back from their personal email to the corporate email. It can create a lot of challenges from a business standpoint. So trying to understand that relationship, trying to understand what that risk is, and then putting, to me, I'm very big on the financial quantification side. And this is not something the CISO should be making a determination on his or herself. It should be
Yeah.
made across the board. That gets to be a big challenge. Because part of the challenge, going back to the board discussion too, is a lot of times I'm finding the CISOs don't have the skills to communicate or effectively communicate in a way that makes sense from a business standpoint and quite often a board perspective as well. So all of these things are challenges when you're talking about total transformation of an organization. It's got to be looked at from what I'm hearing from you is board perspective, the C-level perspective when you're talking about the CEO, the COO, and maybe some others depending on the organization, and then also the other C-level executives. But you've also got to build a pipeline of people that have this transformation mindset and the willingness to look, grow, and change. And that to me, sounds like a lot of fun and very exciting. It's part of what I do, but it's also something that can be very daunting for people. I talk to people that are very concerned. All I need to do is focus on this, and they're complaining like, no, I can't learn the language of the business. And some of that has to do with how much time you have as a CISO. If you're buried in work and you're already working 60, 80 hours, I've done the 80, 90 hours per week myself, you don't have time to pick up and learn something else. It seems foreign, but it's probably some of the most important skills. So you're looking at a whole corporate transformation effort that's got to take place to achieve some of those goals. How would you interpret some of what I'm saying there? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? Or is there something I'm not taking into account?
Anybody, uh, a good friend of mine made this statement, and I included it in my book. Anyone with a C in their title, anyone with a C in their title needs to be speaking the language of the business. Um, Anyone with a C in their title needs to be speaking the language of the business. Everything else that they do is table stakes. Okay, you're not measured by did you install an antivirus software. You're not measured by how many viruses you were able to knock out. You're not measured by all of those things. They're not significant. They're table stakes. They're expected of your job. You do it. What's what's expected of the CISO is an intelligent interpretation of technical and security risks to the senior body of the company. If you can't do that, then you're not achieving the goals of that position. Okay. And I think what you're seeing in most companies, or many companies, is the CISO is, for instance, evolving. They're
Yeah.
hiring more business focused CISOs. they're hiring legal-focused CISOs. A guy comes out of the legal department to head um, the CISO role. A guy coming in from an operational unit of the business to head the CISO role, because that's where the action is. It's not down in the trenches. We've got plenty of people who can keep those things running, who can look at the monitors and react when something turns red. If something beeps real loud, they'll know what to do. You don't need to be involved with that as a CISO. CISO is a business role. And that's where anybody listening who's not doing that needs to start to move towards, because that's where you need it.
Yeah.
The technology skills are really important to you because they help shape your perspective, but they're not real important to the guy asking you the question. He wants to know in business terms, what does this mean to me? What does this mean to the business? Where do we go from here? Those are the kind of questions that the CISO should be prepared to answer.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you because that's one of the areas that I teach. I teach people how to communicate. I give people the Rosetta Stone and how to create the Rosetta Stone for the organization. You can't just have one Rosetta Stone and it covers all organizations. Every organization needs to be determined differently, and it cannot be something that the CISO determines by his or herself, period. This has to be something where everybody's on the same page and we agree. And that's part of my approach.
Yeah, and it is a language thing. It is a language thing. You can't speak to the executive tier in the same language you speak to the rest of your technical body. Even if they understand it, they'll pretend they don't. Okay? Uh, they'll pretend they don't because it gives them a level of accountability that they don't want. Okay?
Yeah.
They don't want to be accountable to understanding or misunderstanding your technical jargon. They want you to put it in English, context that they understand, English or any other language, in a business context they understand and can use. If they can't use it, they don't need it. An executive is there to execute. Okay, that's why they call them executives. They're there to execute. If you're not giving them the information they need to execute, you're not helping. You know,
Yeah. And that's
so
another big problem I see in organizations too.
yeah,
Responsibility without authority, that's just one angle of it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you can look at, and this is probably, creating some of the confusion. If you look at a lot of organizations, look at their business continuity organization. How many business continuity organizations are headed by an executive vice president? I mean, how many can you count? Most, it's a coordinator, manager, maybe a VP. Um, Same is true with privacy. These are
Yeah.
delegated. Cybersecurity, you get a little bit higher because you got a CISO, so you got somebody with a C in their title, you know. But again, there's a question: should that CISO be associated with cybersecurity, or should the cybersecurity people just inform him so that he can properly
Yeah.
inform?
And that's a delicate answer. I could spend an hour on that question
Yeah.
alone.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And we went through that issue with the CIO before the CISO question,
Yep. Yep.
and so, this is an old question, and it's a transformational question. But these are kind of the issues. You got to be able to get the language balance right. You've got to get to be able to communicate to executives and boards in languages that they need. You need to bring them the statistics, the KPIs, not that you think are important, but that they need. The ones that they can make decisions based on. Again, how many responses to a consumer request we've answered is nice. but it's not interesting.
Yeah.
How much
Like,
revenue did we generate because of taking this action? That's more interesting.
or
You know,
what revenue are you losing because you're using agents and people can't talk to somebody? How much is that costing the business?
yeah,
Another
yeah,
great question. So should you keep it? Should you not keep it?
yeah. And these are the issues. What we're seeing is we're seeing a transformation from technology organizations and other siloed organizations to people that can together um, support a business's need to understand. You need to go back to my kind of opening statement. You need to know your business, where it operates, what it does,
Yeah.
the processes it performs, sub-processes, tasks, subtasks, who's in charge of each of those, what their personalities and interests are. If they're a person who is likely to be overzealous, you want to know that. If you're a person who's overly cautious, you need to know that. If it's a person who's been very quick to adopt new technology, you want to know that. Because when you're looking to do your AI inventory, where are you going to look? You're going to look at the overzealous guy. You're going to look at the guy who's anxious to adopt new technology. You can always talk to the guy who's overly cautious after that conversation's done. You need to know your organization. You need to know your business. You need to know what you do, why you do it, and how you could do it better so that you can, AI is a process problem. It's an engineering or a re-engineering of business problem. It's not a technology issue.
Love
We
it.
can prompt ourselves to death, but this is a process issue, and we know how to govern a process. We just need to know that governing this one will be different because we first have to figure out what AI governance is. What is quantum governance? What is, all of these things are going to carry a little bit of their own flavor that needs to be integrated because we've got a finite number of people watching the shop and, and a lot of new stuff coming at us.
Yeah. So getting close to the end here, it's just a couple more questions. So if you could change one fundamental assumption that executives hold about technology-driven transformation, what would it be, and what would they understand differently once that assumption is challenged?
Interesting question. It kind of feels like some of the definition of what the new mode digital transformation is supposed to be is the answer. And the answer is, in my mind, understand that, you know, that AI, quantum, um, genomics, advanced statistics, biomedicine, all of these things, whichever touches you, um, they're not standing still. The depth of data, uh, the speed of processing, the all of this stuff. It's not standing still, and it's not standing alone. They'll all integrate. And as they integrate, your governance issues increase, or at least transform. You need to know where your business is. You need to know where your business is going to know what it's going to touch. If you're a company that's involved in uh, genomics or genetics, and you're collecting a massive amount of uh, personal genetic data, you need to know that that genetic data is personal data. So where is it stored? It's stored in massive repositories because that's where clinical trials gain their data from. So how do you protect massive repositories of personal or specifically sensitive data? There's layers and layers of decision. that are coming at us because this is all in transformation. It's not staying the same. And executives need to understand that how they shape their organizations, how they shape business direction, um, the technologies that they employ, all of this stuff um, is in flux. AI that they're dealing with today is not the AI they're going to deal with tomorrow. As I said, neural networks to machine learning to
Yeah.
chat. And it's not the AI they're going to deal with today. The business structure that they have now, business, um, globalization, competitive differentiation, all of this stuff, how they achieve and manage trust, the consumer, the differentiation of the consumer, the markets that they enter, all of that is changing. All of that's changing while all of this technology is coming. So, you step back and you say, what does that mean to me?
Yeah. And I think that's a very, very powerful reflection. And I think more people do need that. You need a little bit of quiet in leadership positions
Yeah.
to sit down and be able to think that, because most people are so quickly, they don't have time to reflect, because what inadvertently or maybe inadvertently, you need to have time to be able to reflect where you're at. You need to be able to reflect what's going on. You need some understanding of things, and getting that communication to get to the level of governance that you're talking about. It's you have to break down the silo with everything that you're saying. So I completely agree with your opening remarks around breaking down that silo. I think it's really important.
Yeah, and it's culture and it's society, all
Yeah.
of that is, look everywhere. It's all politics, it's everything, politics, geopolitics,
Yep.
national interests, all of this stuff is in flux. We haven't seen a world like this before because the world is moving very, very fast. And when the world is moving fast, you've got two choices. You sit down or hold on, and,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
we kind of got to do that now because um, the best businesses are the businesses that uh, are forward looking, but not overzealous. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess for the final question I've got for you here today is, if you were to look, say 10 years into the future, maybe 20 years, whatever works best for you, what leadership principle do you believe will remain constant no matter how dramatically technology will continue to evolve? What's important from a leadership perspective?
Yeah, I kind of think that it's the sum of all of which we just answered. And um, and yeah, 10 years, 12 years, whatever time perspective we put on this, if we still have businesses that look like the businesses we have today, which means walls with people contained that report into a common organization up top, if that's the mechanism that we have then, as opposed to dissolved walls and uh, federations of businesses that interact around the supply chain to solve a specific problem, maybe. We don't know where business is going. All we know is it's going to get there fast. And it's going to get there a lot faster than we either expected or wanted to. Um, what we need to position for is an understanding that there probably will be fewer human employees, more agent employees within specific functions. Other functions are going to rely on people uh, for now. Will that remain the case out 20 years from now? Maybe we all get to sit on the beach and let the agents send us a text when they're done. That'd be nice. That'd be nice. But, the key values that executives need to have. Um, uh, that focus, that diligence, that perspective, ethics, the uh, yeah, concern for the company and what it does, concern for people, concern for product, concern for trust, all of that stuff are the values. And values is what you need to perpetuate now and 10 years from now and 20 years from now. Without them, it doesn't matter what you do. So everything else around them is going to evolve. The definition of trust, what expectations come from trust, what technologies we use, how we secure things, can we secure things, all of that stuff may change, but it's
Sure.
the values you expect, the decency that you expect of an executive that's got to continue.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've learned a lot. I think you and I are aligned on a lot of our thinking. So I think that was great. You brought, all of your decades of experience across all of these different areas together, and you have a very strong perspective on how governance should be set up. What are the changes we need from a board perspective? I think everybody's going to enjoy this conversation. So I want to thank you very much for being here and sharing your wisdom. I think everybody here will be appreciated. I know I definitely appreciate it. So thank you very much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for the invite. Great call.
Thank you.